One of the most iconic faces on A&E, he was a metal-headed exterminator dressed entirely in black leather who confronted alligators, snakes, and enormous wasp nests fearlessly. William Brotherton became a legitimate TV star thanks to Billy the Exterminator, which lasted for 6 consecutive seasons and attracted millions of devoted fans. Then it was just one day. AA vanished. There is no conclusion, not a decent farewell, no justification, just quiet. Fans were left wondering what had occurred after learning that the show had been canceled without being provided an explanation. Because the true reason this program ended is far more complicated than most people understand. We're going over the entire tale today. Why did people love Billy Brotherton, and who was he? You must comprehend why the program was so successful in the first place in order to comprehend why the conclusion hit the way it did. Billy was actually different from everyone else on television at the time, so that starts with him. Growing up in Benton, Louisiana, William "Billy" Brotherton didn't match the stereotype of a pest control professional right away. Billy was a heavy metal fan. Dark sunglasses, spikes, silver jewelry, long hair, and all black leather. You wouldn't think he was going to deal with a hornet's nest in someone's attic if you saw him on the street without any background. However, it was precisely this contrast, the metalhead who was also a qualified entomologist, that made him so captivating. He wasn't acting out a role. He really was that person. He enlisted in the U.S. at age 19, Air Force, where assessments indicated a natural talent for entomology and biology. After being promoted to senior airman and stationed at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, he received actual, hands-on training in pest control. Following his discharge from the military, he went back to Louisiana and joined his family's company, Vexcon Animal and Pest Control, which is owned and operated by his parents, Big Bill and Donnie, along with his brother Ricky. Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe on the Discovery Channel was his debut television appearance. His personality immediately came to life on screen. He was intelligent, humorous, and totally comfortable in front of the camera. After taking note, A&E launched The Exterminators in 2009. From Season 2 onward, the show was renamed Billy the Exterminator. The program quickly attracted viewers. People actually liked Billy. They didn't merely watch him. And that's what kept them returning for 6 seasons. And nothing seemed to be able to stop it for a while. But here's the issue that no one asked when the numbers were rising. Could a show that revolved around a single person's real life last if that person's real life broke apart? What the show was really like and why it worked. It's worthwhile to take a moment to consider what made the show so compelling to watch, as it clarifies the emptiness it left behind. Billy and his crew were usually followed on several pest control calls in each episode of Billy the Exterminator. The tasks ranged widely, from alligator relocations and snake extractions to beehive removals and cockroach infestations, and everything in between. The temperature and ecosystem of Louisiana make it an intriguing setting for this kind of show, since you're dealing with animals that most of the nation never sees. Enormous fire ant colonies. Drainage ditches are home to nutria rats. Poisonous snakes in backyards of homes. It never felt forced, and the variety was just amazing. The human element was what distinguished the broadcast from other wildlife or pest-themed shows. Billy never turned the animals against him. He constantly clarified that the majority of what he was doing was humane relocation, which involves taking animals from areas where they would cause problems and relocating them to areas where they could live. The way he discussed it on video demonstrated his genuine appreciation for the biology underlying what he was dealing with. A structural peculiarity in the format was recognized by the production itself. Billy and Ricky had a habit of narrating what they were doing in real time, explaining the species, the behavior, and the removal technique, because they never knew exactly what footage they would end up using from any given call. This way, important information would not be lost, regardless of which scenes made the final cut. In addition to being a clever solution, it increased the show's instructional value. A big part of the show's attraction was the family component. His parents were kind, humorous, and encouraging. Ricky, his brother, was an expert exterminator and his closest colleague. Mary, Billy's wife, had made appearances in previous seasons, but she eventually left the show, allegedly because she didn't feel comfortable being on camera. However, there were also reports of internal conflict that were never fully addressed. The show never underwent a significant self-reinvention in its 6 seasons. It was not need to. Billy's charisma effortlessly handled the weight of each episode. The audience was devoted, and the fundamental formula worked. Billy the Exterminator was a show that by all accounts ought to have lasted for many years. Given that the audience, the format, the family, and the ratings all worked in its favor, what could have been powerful enough to bring the entire thing down? The arrest that caused the unraveling. When the year 2012 dawned, things began to fall apart. Billy and his spouse Mary were taken into custody in Bossier Parish, Louisiana, that same year. Police reportedly discovered the pair in possession of synthetic marijuana, which at the time was becoming more and more popular as a legal gray area narcotic, despite the fact that several states were in the process of outlawing it. Billy soon entered a guilty plea to the charges. He was fined $500 and required to perform community service, but the court verdict was not too harsh. It was as trivial as it gets in terms of legal repercussions. However, reputational harm and legal seriousness are two quite distinct things, and the arrest had a different impact depending on Billy's identity and what the show stood for. More than almost any other type of entertainment, reality television relies on the audience's bond with the characters. The people in it are held to a standard that fictional characters are not, because it is marketed as real life. It's difficult when a lead actor in a written show gets into trouble off-screen, but the character they play might not be affected. The distinction between a reality TV star and their identity completely blurs when they are arrested. Whether someone wants it to or not, it becomes a part of the narrative. The arrest caused a branding issue for A&E. Billy was portrayed by the network as a charming, quirky, family-oriented man who was skilled and passionate about his career. An arrest raises questions, even if it's for a small narcotics offense. It makes the story more difficult to follow. Additionally, networks in this field typically have other options and are not in the business of negotiating complexities surrounding their skills. The timing is equally important to consider. Billy was still actively involved with the production when the arrest was made public. It was a recent story that appeared in local and entertainment news, not an old one from before he became well known. A&E had to decide how to handle it, and it seemed from the outside that they quietly decided to back off rather than endure the storm. However, the arrest might not have been sufficient to put an end to the show on its own. Even in the face of more serious scandals, networks have continued to broadcast programming. What transpired next, within the Bretherton family itself, was what truly put an end to things. The spark came from the arrest. However, was a $500 fine and some community service truly sufficient to end a 6-season blockbuster show, or was there already something far more serious going on beneath the surface? The family fallout and the end of VexCon as they knew it. This is the section of the story that is rarely recounted because it took place mostly behind closed doors. However, it's maybe the most crucial element in comprehending why the show ended in the manner that it did, without a formal farewell or clear explanation. Serious difficulties arose within the Bretherton family after the arrest and the public attention that followed. Billy kept that aspect of the situation private and never went into great detail about it in public. However, the result was obvious. He moved to Illinois and broke up with VexCon, not just a short drive away, but hundreds of miles from Benton, Louisiana, his parents, his brother, and everything the program revolved around, in a completely different part of the nation. The problem is that Billy the Exterminator was not a notion that could be transferred. Billy Bretherton and his family at VexCon, Louisiana, constituted the series' whole identity. Production had nothing to work with when he left all of that. No place, there is no supporting cast, not a premise. A&E was unable to reconstruct what had developed naturally over the years or recast the lead. Before the network formally announced the show's cancellation, real life had already done so. In 2025, Ricky attempted to keep things going with a YouTube series called VexCon the Exterminators, but it only ran 16 episodes and never became popular. The formula just didn't work without Billy as the main character. There was also no farewell. There is no conclusion. Years later, people are still looking for answers, since after season 6, there was nothing but silence. At this point, A&E lacked a site, a supporting cast, and a production setup. What precisely did the network do, and why didn't they put in more effort to salvage one of their own programs? How A&E handled it, and what it says about the network. The way A&E handled the Billy the Exterminator incident reveals a lot about how the network functioned at the time, and about how reality TV networks often handle untidy endings. The reason for the show's cancellation was not disclosed by the network, Without any explanation, viewers were only informed that it was ended. This was a determined move to prevent bringing further attention to the situation, rather than an act of carelessness. A&E would have been boosting a narrative they wished to stealthily avoid if they had issued a comment either about Billy's arrest or the family situation at VexCon. It was simpler to be silent. It's also important to think about A&E's current state as a network. The network was undergoing change by the years 2012 and 2013. The network was increasingly concentrating on Duck Dynasty and a few other high-performing properties, because it had grown to be a phenomenon that eclipsed nearly everything else they had. Although it wasn't their best show, Billy the Exterminator was a good performer. There wasn't the same institutional commitment to battling to keep it running when the production situation got problematic, as there may have been for a show with a greater priority. More often than viewers realize, this occurs in television. It's not always the case that a show is canceled due to a drop in viewership or a deliberate decision by the network. Sometimes a show stops because the conditions that made it feasible cease to exist, and the network just doesn't put in enough effort to re-establish them. Billy the Exterminator caused the show's practical foundation to collapse, and instead of attempting to restore it, A&E chose to let it fall. Their reality roster was left with a significant void as a result of that choice, which may have left viewers of that genre of show without a true successor. Since then, there have been several reality shows about pest control, but none of them have been able to replicate Billy the Exterminator's charm, skill, and familial friendliness. The network had moved on. Billy hadn't completely given up, though. What transpired when he eventually had the opportunity to return, and why did it not work out? Billy's comeback, which nearly brought him back to life, did not vanish forever. He had a second chance at television after a few years away from the spotlight, but it came from a different angle. Billy was approached about a new series in 2016 by the Canadian network CMT. The idea was simple: transport Billy to Canada, assign him tasks related to pest and animal management in a new setting, and observe how his personality adapted to a totally different setting. Billy Goes North, a 12-episode series that debuted on CMT Canada in 2016, was the outcome. Billy had an opportunity to show that his on-screen persona had not diminished in the years he had been off television, and the show was well received by the fans who discovered it. The formula, which was practically the same as the original show, worked just as well in a Canadian setting as it had in Louisiana, and he was still instantly recognized and at ease in front of the camera. Billy Goes North was repackaged and broadcast in the US in 1927, as what some viewers believed to be the 7th and last season of Billy the Exterminator. Even if it felt a little off from where the original series had left off, it was a wonderful surprise for fans who had been waiting 5 years for any kind of comeback. However, the rebirth only lasted for that one season. Billy moved away from television once more after Billy Goes North. There were no development agreements, no announcements of more seasons, and no signs that a complete return to the original format was in the works. He just vanished from sight. There are several potential explanations for that. A&E would have needed to make a huge investment to develop a mainstream American audience from scratch due to the significant gap between the original show and the Canadian resurrection, and it's unclear if the network was willing to take that risk. Billy was also older, and it was obvious that the years had altered his perspective on the entertainment aspect of the industry. If his desire to be on television had ever been his main incentive, it didn't appear to be motivating him at this time. However, the Canadian season demonstrated that Billy's skill for this genre of television had not diminished. The ability persisted even if the window had closed. One quiet exit, one season in Canada, and an unresolved reality TV legacy. However, what does this story's complete picture actually reveal, and where is Billy right now? Billy Bretherton continues to work in the pest control industry. Billy, Ricky, and Billy's son Bryce are listed on the official VexCon website as members of the current operation, which is now situated in Illinois, indicating that the family quarrel that pushed him out of VexCon in Louisiana has eventually mended. They are still working and managing the company, but they are not being followed by cameras. Billy occasionally appears in his son's content, and Bryce has established his own social media career on TikTok. Although it's a very different kind of exposure than a weekly A&E series, Billy's relationship with the viewers who grew up watching the show is maintained. People who remember it and are happy to find he's still alive frequently leave comments. Billy has not returned to mainstream television, but his son Bryce is effectively carrying on the family's legacy as a new generation. There are no new initiatives, no network agreements, and no signs of a return. He seems to have come to terms with leaving that world behind. Billy the Exterminator's narrative finally illustrates how brittle reality television can be. The show was successful because it included genuine people, real families, real businesses, and real locations. However, real-world events can break in ways that fictional structures cannot. There was no writing room to make things right, no casting department to take his place, and no made-up world to escape into when the show's reality broke. The stability of the show depended on the stability of the life it was portraying. However, 6 seasons is a true legacy. The fact that millions of viewers still recall it, continue to look for it, and are curious about what transpired indicates that the program truly had an impact on the viewers. It should have had a better conclusion. It simply never received one. That's the whole story, the true cause of Billy the Exterminator's demise. The foundation was shattered by a drug arrest. The show's entire structural backbone was lost due to family strife. And the network felt it would be easier to simply walk away than to struggle to keep it continuing. Billy himself took a step back, rebuilt his life away from the spotlight, and although there was one last chapter up in Canada, the homecoming never quite came to pass as fans had hoped. And to be honest, that's probably the reason why, years later, people are still talking about this show. Fans never got the neat conclusion they had hoped for. No heartfelt farewell. Not a huge reunion special. Billy was wrestling snakes in someone's garden 1 minute, and then, as A&E thought no one would notice, the show had essentially disappeared. However, others did take note, to a great extent. Please click the like button if this video helped you understand what happened, or if it reminded you of the program.
It really does make a difference for this channel, and it only takes 2 seconds.
If you're interested in more in-depth analyses like this one, please subscribe. We frequently uncover the true stories behind shows and celebrities that departed without providing a suitable reason. And leave a remark below. When Billy the Exterminator was on, did you watch it? Do you recall wondering what went wrong when it vanished? Tell me what this show means to you. I read everything down there.